Thank you, Neil, and thank you all for attending this event tonight. This is somewhat unusual. We're going to be presenting information tonight that is virtually unheard of around the world. But what I want you to first imagine yourself doing, because it applies to the medical renaissance that we're going to describe, is travel back in time about 700 years. That's about 1400 AD. That is when the historic Renaissance period initiated. And what was interesting is, while a lot of changes were occurring, the Renaissance, by the way, was a period between the Dark Ages in Europe and the modern society that we have today. So the Renaissance represented a transition of human thinking, a transition of societal behavior. And that is happening right now in the very early stages. So as I give this presentation tonight, please understand that you are at the very early stage, only a couple years into the most significant medical renaissance of history, of all human history. And because this renaissance involves the control of biological aging, that means that this is going to exceed all the wonderful things that the Renaissance delivered to us. And what I'm looking for right now is my little clicker, and I think I see it here. The media has picked up on the fact that scientists right now in laboratories around the world are experimenting on therapies to reverse aging processes. They're accomplishing this in the animal model. And what has happened is some of these physician scientists want to start experimenting on humans. So a news clip that made headline news around the world is there's going to be a huge clinical study on a prescription drug called metformin. That drug is prescribed to treat type 2 diabetes. It also happens to prevent cancer. It happens to prevent the progression into type 2 diabetes. And it also slows aging. This is going to be a huge human study. The media has exaggerated somewhat the benefits of metformin. They're claiming it may enable people to live 120 years. I got news for you, it won't. We're big proponents of the drug, by the way. I've spoken about it virtually every service we've had. I've advocated to you, ask your doctor to prescribe metformin whether or not you have type 2 diabetes. It's very good for you, and it's being recognized by credible scientists. The researcher, Dr. George Church at Harvard University, he's doing incredible work with gene editing. And what that means is they're going to be able to program your genes so you grow younger and that you do not develop the chronic diseases that plague elderly individuals. The technology is called CRISPR. You're going to read more and more about this because it has the solution potentially to every human disease that we suffer from today, including biological aging. And he is predicting this will be available to human beings within the next 5 years. We're very, very excited about it. As I mentioned, this is a medical renaissance. And 2015 may have been the year when enough people in society recognized that for the headline media to say, is this the year we decided to live forever? Because with CRISPR technology, once that's perfected, we're not going to fall ill anymore. We're not going to suffer the consequences of aging. It's going to be potentially the cure for every disorder we currently suffer from. The billionaires, the founders of Google, Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, they don't want to get old. They're spending money on age reversal research. They've set up subsidiaries of their companies to put some of their wealth into technology that may enable all of us to stay biologically younger. We're very excited about that. And again, this metformin study, it attracted worldwide news coverage. People like the idea of taking a pill and not suffering the ravages of aging. Self-experimentation is something that's going on undercover. Almost no one knows it's happening. But there are individuals, some of them are physicians, some of them are scientists, some of them are just very knowledgeable lay people. They are putting experimental compounds into their own bodies and very carefully measuring the impact of what's going on to see if they're able to induce an age reversal effect in themselves. I communicate with these people, by the way, on a somewhat regular basis, and it's interesting how meticulous they are tracking whether or not they are really reversing their own aging process. Most of you remember a time when automobile accidents were a leading cause of mortality in the United States. Back in the 1960s, about 56,000 Americans perished in automobile wrecks. Now, there's 3 times more cars on the road today compared to the 1960s. There's less than 30,000 people who die in car wrecks. Volvo is predicting by year 2020, they'll have a death-proof automobile. It'll have sonar, radar, a computer system, so that it'll be virtually impossible for it to get into a wreck. But if it does get into a wreck, it'll also have so many safety features that the occupants will not die. I can't wait till 2020, because I think there'll be, frankly, a lot of car companies doing this. And the prediction, by the way, is by year 2032, virtually no one will die as a result of an automobile collision. And that includes pedestrians. Motorists and pedestrians will be protected by the technology that is evolving. So we're going to see something that was killing 56,000 people a year in the 1960s, which should be killing, if the technology didn't advance, about 150,000 a year. It's going to drop down to virtually 0. And we think the same technology is going to result in biological aging. An update on cryonics. A brain preservation prize was awarded to a group of scientists in Southern California. They were able to cryopreserve a brain with very little damage to younger blood components. They become younger. Now, there's 2 ways of doing parabiosis research. Now, there's some young people in this audience that we could grab, a healthy 21-year-old, and we could suture them onto an older person. And I would think there would be some incredible benefits, though in the human model, that's probably not possible to do. I don't think we get too many people to volunteer to let that happen to them, because they'd literally be stuck to that older person for a multi-year period of time. The older person would love it, by the way, but unfortunately the younger person would develop some deleterious problems, because old blood actually accelerates aging in young animals. So you want to do something about that old blood. So a more civilized way of engaging in this human experiment, where we're going to attempt to reverse aging, is to concentrate stem cell mobilized plasma components from younger individuals, concentrate those, and infuse them into an elderly human. It'll be a group of 30 to 40 elderly humans that we're going to enable, we hope, the aging process to be reversed via the process of parabiosis. You might ask, does the research indicate that that's going to enable older people to live longer? Answer is, a 1972 study showed, yeah, you give young blood to an older animal and they can live longer. This study showed they live 10 to 12 years, I believe, longer than they normally would, because they had access to the young blood. Year 2015, a plethora of studies published in the most prestigious scientific journals demonstrated that parabiosis is an effective age reversal technology. And they were able to show systemic reversal of aging. They looked at all the different components of the older animal, and they noticed, this is a church, remember, not a concert hall, so we make little mistakes from those volunteers back there. But nonetheless, parabiosis induces systemic age reversal, and that's critical. We wouldn't want to just make our brains younger and have our kidneys fail, or our hearts no longer produce enough circulation to sustain our life. We need systemic age reversal, and that's the objective of the study. This chart, by the way, shows the status of parabiosis research. You can see in the 1970s it actually peaked. And then for various reasons, mainly lack of funding, they didn't keep it up. They started doing it again in year 2012. And these are some of the comments made by scientists who are doing the parabiosis research. They have different opinions as to how effective it may be, but they're all in concurrence that it has a high probability of working to induce systemic rejuvenation. All the slides you're seeing, by the way, are excerpts from peer-reviewed published studies that are in scientific journals that consistently show the beneficial effects of parabiosis in the animal model. Systemic rejuvenation. And you want that. You want the endothelial lining of your arteries to be rejuvenated back to a younger state so that the atherosclerosis hopefully dissipates. So your risk of stroke, heart attack, renal failure, they dissipate. They go away because of the systemic rejuvenation that you're able to enjoy. 5 million Americans suffer with congestive heart failure. Most of them will die of that condition, very slowly die. A lot of progress has been made, by the way, in treating congestive heart failure, but it's still a life-threatening disease. We believe, based on the research, parabiosis research will restore energy to the heart muscle. It'll rejuvenate the heart just like it does the brain, the muscle, the vascular system. We're going to see systemic age reversal. So the fundamental premise of what we know right now is that young blood systemically rejuvenates old mammals. We know that from dozens and dozens of published studies that consistently reveal young blood makes those old animals a lot younger. So we need to start funding human research. We need to know how can we make this work with aging humans. We sure don't want to miss the boat, like those people that I showed earlier in this presentation. They missed the longevity boat. They're not going to make it, unfortunately. But the benefits of this kind of research is sparing Medicare from insolvency. If older people aren't sick anymore, well, they're not going to utilize a lot of medical resources. All of a sudden, the Medicare Trust Fund is no longer going to go broke in 10 to 15 years like everyone projects. And decades of healthy life being added to our lifespan. And I'm talking about healthy life. Those animals don't not only live longer, they were made to be much healthier. The decline in cognitive function, it starts right after the age of 30 in a meaningful way. We lose our short-term memory loss, and then we descend into a state of dementia. A consistent finding with parabiosis research is the cognitive function is restored. Neurodegeneration is reversed. This is spectacular because of the epidemic of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and vascular dementia that's being predicted. Well, that may never happen. If we can mobilize the bone marrow of young people and concentrate that and infuse it into elderly people, all of those neurodegenerative diseases may no longer be a factor when it comes to aging. Sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass and function, it's what makes old people so frail for the most part. They literally lose muscle strength. Parabiosis reverses that. In fact, a protein, that GDF11, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but that's one of the factors in young blood that may reverse aging. We don't know that for sure, but there are human beings right now who have gotten their hands on GDF11 and they're self-experimenting. And they're telling me via email they think it's working. A little bit too premature to know that for sure. Our brains, not only do we notice the fact we can't remember as much as we used to, we don't have the mental energy, but we lose neurological function. Our brain atrophies the longer we live. It literally shrinks. But parabiosis, all those young blood components, it restores the structure, the synaptic density, all of those manifestations of neurological aging, they're reversed in response to parabiosis. Our vascular system, it's the Achilles tendon of modern man. We develop heart attacks, strokes, kidney failure, even intestinal ischemia. That kills people, where blood supply just stops flowing to their intestines and they die a horrible death. Well, parabiosis reverses the decline in vascular function that occurs with almost anyone if they live long enough. And the fact that the proteins in the young blood being put into the older people is able to induce this effect has a lot of credentialed people very, very excited. And Harvard is leading right now with the GDF11 research. They've already done the parabiosis studies. Now they're trying to figure out, is GDF11 that compound in young blood that's going to make us young again? A lot of controversy about it, but they at least are doing the research. And the research they're doing so far indicates it seems to be working. But we're not going to rely on one compound. None of us in this room really have time to rely on one potential compound to reverse aging. We need to get the stem cell mobilized plasma components of young people and put all of those into elderly people to see how much reversal of aging we can accomplish. But this, from Harvard, just one protein from young blood put into old animals makes those old animals grow younger. And young animals have lots of GDF-11, just like young people. And then, unfortunately, you get older and you don't make it anymore. That's always been a problem. Dr. Jarvik at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, he is so much a proponent of this that he wants to experiment on people's pets. People get attached to their pets. The pet becomes 10 to 14 years of age. It's going to die soon. And he feels people will want their pets to undergo parabiosis so that they can be made younger again. He needs about $900,000 for this study. And I hope some wealthy person writes him a check for that. We're not able to do that, by the way. I had a long conversation with him on the phone. He's very motivated to do this. He just needs $900,000. And we don't have it. Johnson & Johnson, largest pharmaceutical company in the world. They put $50 million into Stanford University to do parabiosis-like research on human beings. They want to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease, and they believe, at least with $50 million of their money, that it may happen. So you've got Stanford and Harvard and Cambridge, the most credentialed, prestigious research universities in the world. They're all doing this right now. But I don't think they're doing it enough. I don't think they have the dedication that the people in this congregation have to achieving indefinitely extended, healthy human lifespan. If J&J develops a therapy for Alzheimer's, it may only work for Alzheimer's. And that's not going to do an old person a whole lot of good if they have blocked coronary arteries, or if they have prostate cancer, or develop any of the other problems that older people have to suffer. So here is the clinical study that we intend to launch here in South Florida. At the South Florida Bone Marrow Stem Cell Institute. We want to take 30 older people and give them access to stem cell mobilized youthful plasma components. We're not going to put stem cells into them from young people. That has a lot of potential side effect risks. We're going to put on the exosomes that the stem cells emit, the proteins and the cytokines that the young stem cells emit, because young cytokines suppress inflammation. Older people have cytokines that promote chronic inflammatory disease that causes them to prematurely die. So again, the analogy between smallpox, it killed so many people for so many thousands of years. No one could have ever predicted when smallpox plagues routinely came into a village and wiped out more than half the population, the rest of them left with pock marks over their skin. No one could have predicted that it would go away completely. But it did. It went away, and it went away rather slowly. Edward Jenner discovers the smallpox vaccine in 1796. He was criticized by the physicians in his community. He was criticized by religious figures. The idea of using the cowpox virus as a way to inoculate. He came under enormous criticism, but he persevered. And perseverance is what this church is all about, by the way. And by 1840, the government of England, recognizing that Jenner had made an incredible discovery, they mandated universal vaccination, and smallpox disappeared in Britain. Interestingly, though, it didn't disappear throughout the world until 1979. In fact, in the 20th century, between the year 1900 and 1979, 300 million humans around the world died of smallpox. That's a statistic that very few people know. But between 1900 and 1979, when the vaccine was already proven to work, unfortunately, in countries that weren't as well civilized as ours, they didn't have access to that vaccine. Those people died. And I'm afraid that a lot of human beings are going to die just that way. A cure for aging might be right around the corner, but they don't avail themselves to it, or they don't take care of their health well enough to live into that era. So the bottom line is we're going to eliminate pathological aging. And none of us can really afford to wait. We don't want to wait in a way that it gets developed 30 years from now instead of 3 years. Our timetable is to make it happen real fast. We're talking about a medical renaissance, something that will revolutionize the way society behaves. There's a lot of philosophy I could talk about regarding that, but just imagine if people had lifespans ranging from 200 to 300 years. Would they be as likely to engage in war? Would they be as likely to engage in short-term destructive habits that would ruin their opportunities to live 200, 300 or more years? We think it would solve a lot of societal problems. But that's another topic, and we'll address that later at this Church of Perpetual Life. So what I want to do is introduce the physician scientist There's not many of them, by the way. There's a lot of physicians out there, and there's a lot of scientists. There's very few physician scientists who both treat people clinically, and while they're treating them, they devise more efficient ways of either curing their disease or inducing a remission. Dr. Dipnarine Maharaj is a hematologist oncologist. If he wanted to, he could make a ton of money just treating cancer patients. Oncologists do really well that way. He would prefer, though, to find a way to reverse biological aging in humans. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Dipnarine Maharaj.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. I think I'm not going to need this. Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here again. The second time, I enjoyed my first time here, and we had a wonderful audience. And again, I see a wonderful audience here today. And Bill has done a wonderful introduction, which allows me to be able to continue with what and share with you the experience that we're seeing. I have to tell you my story, and what I plan to do this evening is to share with you some of my experiences and what I feel that by sharing my experiences, the objective is to help everyone in the audience to actually make a difference in what we're doing today, because our objective is healthy aging. Many different terms for the same approach. Bill calls it reversal of aging. But I think our main goal is that when we live our lives, we want to be able to live to the fullest extent that we can. And I'm going to share with you today, based upon my experience, what I have learned to be able to help as many people as possible, because the secret really lies in recognizing where we are today, learning the lessons that others have learned. Bill talked about the fact that there are billionaires who are dying at age 66. And in fact, in spite of amassing all of that amount of money, it's really not being able to help them. But each individual person has to take responsibility for their own health. And I want to share with you some of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about three concepts and bringing the three together. The first one, can you show me I'd like to see a show of hands for those people who understand the term inflammation. That's pretty good. I think you all recognize as we get older, inflammation occurs. I want to see a show of hands for those people who recognize what they understand about the immune system. Our immune system is important. And now I want to see a show of hands for those people who understand what stem cells are. Well, this is pretty good. Most of the time, actually, most people, they understand the first two, but the second one. So what I want to do is to connect the dots and share with you some of the experiences of patients who I've been working with to be able to treat major diseases and help those patients with those diseases where nothing else has worked. And then I want to be able to go through in the second part of my lecture some of the things that everyone could do. The research that Bill talked about, just to share with you, it's the process that we're going through right now is, number one, to be able to make that a standard of care, one has to go through the processes where you get it approved. And so we are in the process right now of putting together, we're putting the documents together, which we will submit it because we want to get it approved by the FDA as an indication for the diseases associated with aging. There are multiple diseases associated with aging, and we want to be able to do that. So we're doing it in this way. It's a human clinical study. Most of what Bill talked to you about were animals. I did lab research very early in my career, and I have to tell you this. There are many, many animals who are running around cured of their cancers. But we still have to translate that into humans. So I much prefer that whatever we do, we can help humans, but we do it in safe ways. And so again, that's why we focused our research in terms of translational. And I'm a translational scientist. That's basically, I'm a physician and I'm a translational scientist, and we do clinical studies. And this is a unique study because the work that's being done at Stanford is using young blood, but what we are doing is a souped up young blood that contains many, many factors that we believe will really make a big difference and accelerate this process of everyone being able to hopefully be able to achieve healthy aging. So I'm going to show you some videos throughout my lecture.
I'm Dr. Dipnarine Maharaj. I'm the founder and the medical director of the South Florida Bone Marrow Stem Cell Transplant Institute. If we take the human body, every single organ or tissue in the body has stem cells. The difference, though, is that between tissues is that the bone marrow, which is where blood is produced, has the most abundant source of stem cells. By a process we call mobilization, we can allow the release of those stem cells from the bone marrow into the blood, and then we collect those cells from the blood for our patients. As we age, our immune system deteriorates, and so for somebody who is over 65, their immune function is considerably decreased. We're asking young people to donate some of their cells which forms the immune system. And in our clinical study, we're giving back that to patients who have cancers. When we've done the same thing in mice, we've seen that the cells of the young mice will go directly to the cancer cells and kill it.
So that work that we're doing was the first human, we won't call it parabiosis, but it's the first study where we've taken young blood and given it back to patients, but patients who specifically have cancer. And I have to be very appreciative and proud that Bill Falloon and the Life Extension Foundation were the group that actually saw the vision of doing this several years ago and actually gave us some of the funding to be able to do that study, which is ongoing. Again, the objective is to be able to take that through, and I'll talk a little bit more about immunotherapy. But now what we're doing is using the experience that we got from that study to now be able to apply it to aging. My story is basically, I grew up in Scotland. I was educated at the University of Glasgow. I was part of a founding program where we were one of the first groups in the world to be able to use an individual's own stem cells, and we were treating patients with blood cancers at the time. We thought it was the chemotherapy that we were giving was actually what was treating the patients, but later on we found out that in fact, with the studies we've done, all we were doing by using the individual's own stem cells is that we were repairing the immune system. That's a process called reinstatement of immune surveillance. You'll hear me talk about that. When anyone is healthy, their immune system is essentially working well. When cancer occurs, the immune system breaks down. To cure cancer, we've got to maintain immune surveillance. What we did with those patients with blood cancers was we were able to reinstate immune surveillance. We were able to take their own stem cells and able to turn them back on so that they regenerated the immune system. Everything I'm talking to you about today is about reinstating immune surveillance, measuring it, correcting it, and looking at different ways to maintain that. So in our program, initially what we did was we would focus on patients who had blood cancers. But now our program focuses on everything, all the areas where we are actually looking at regenerative medicine using stem cells for the whole family. We do collect babies' cord blood and store them. And for anyone who actually stores their own stem cells, Bill talked about gene editing. And what happens is that when you collect and you store your own stem cells, you now have cells which are frozen, and they can be kept frozen, so that if later on, as the technology with measuring genes or genomics, both of the DNA as well as the epigenetics matures, we'll have a blueprint of where we were when we were born or subsequently, so that we can then go back and look at the particular genes which are causing a particular disease. And using this process of gene editing, we will then be able to repair those specific genes that are causing the disease. And this is one of the reasons why I'm advocating that everybody, as part of an overall process of preparing for the technology that is coming, which, as Bill says, it's not far away, within the next 5 years, gene editing will be used. There are already studies where patients who have abnormal genes that cause leukemia, where they have been treated with gene editing, were able to remove the gene, and the disease actually went into remission. Diseases like sickle cell disease, which has a specific gene, that will be amenable to gene editing. We're basically also saying that every single healthy individual should collect and store their own stem cells for the future, because you're storing your immune system. For patients who have chronic diseases, baby boomers are sort of getting to that age where things are beginning to break down. When you begin to feel things are breaking down, they're already breaking down, because the engine is already weakened. And the engine I refer to as our immune system. We can measure it, we can look for where the defects are, and then the objective is using our own stem cells based upon the technology we learned 30 years ago, which was that we could reinstate the immune system. That's basically what we're advocating. We have patients who we're treating with cancer. My whole career has been involved in treating patients with cancer. There are many patients who are alive today who were told that there was nothing that could be done for them. They had 3 or 4 days to live, and they're still alive today, and that was based upon the fact that the objective and the way to treat cancer is to, again, reinstate the immune system. And if you look at USA Today, if you look at Time Magazine, you will see there's a lot of focus now on immunotherapy. But the way to take advantage of immunotherapy is basically be aware of where your immune system is and do all the things to be able to correct it. And I'll go over some of that with you. Our protocol on solid cancers, we talked a little bit about that. I feel that this field of regenerative medicine and using stem cells needs to get out there. And this is one of the reasons why I created a program of 158 hours of CME lectures, and it's called the Stem Cell Education Online. And we want doctors to actually learn about some of the things that we are doing. And this is a good way to do it, not only from myself, from about 50 of the top lecturers in the country. And finally, with the translational research, one of the big areas of focus is to treat with the young blood. So if I go to my next slide, the question that everybody asks is that, what's our dream? After you've accumulated all your money, the Dalai Lama says that man, what he does is basically he will accumulate money and work hard to do so, and then in the later part of his life, he's going to spend that money on his health, trying to maintain his health. And you saw that in some of the people who died at age 66. Our dream is to basically have healthy aging, because if we have healthy aging, then we can enjoy whatever we would like to do. Most people are on an unhealthy aging trajectory. That is, that if you look at the survival curve of people, it actually takes, it goes like this. Our immune system is optimal between the ages of 16 and 35. And as Bill showed in his slide, then you begin to see the increase in the incidence of cancer he showed for breast cancer. But between 35 and 50, there's a further decline. At 65 to 74, the immune system takes a nosedive. That's basically as a result of what we call T-cell immunosenescence. That's the aging of the immune system. It happens to everybody, except there's a select group of people who can live to be 100 and healthy, and they have what we call a no immune risk profile. The majority of people have an immune risk profile. We can measure that. And what I'm doing in our practice is basically we're measuring it and we're correcting it. And we're putting individuals onto a program to be able to maintain that. These are some of the statistics of America's current health problem. It doesn't look very good. Obesity, cancer, 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women will be affected with cancer. 16 million Americans suffer from smoking-related diseases. And if you look at the top 3 causes of death, heart disease, cancer, and strokes. But there's a long list of other diseases. And the growing cost of healthcare is that we're spending trillions of dollars each year on providing reactive care. Let me give you an example of that. If you look at the intensive care units of most hospitals in the United States, you will find there are in a paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine, there are 100,000 people sitting in intensive care units lying in intensive care units. And basically these people, their chances of getting out of the intensive care unit and going back and leading a healthy life is only 12%. The majority will not make it, and the annual cost of that, of looking after those patients, is $20 billion annually. And it is increasing because the baby boomers are coming up after. So we've got to really start looking at things. Another important fact, and that is, Fidelity Investments projects that the average person, by the time they reach age 65, with the current healthcare paradigm, will need $250,000 to be able to pay for just their co-pays and deductibles. And so that's really the amazing facts. And so everybody, we all need to wake up, and we all need to basically say, today, what can we do to take the responsibility for our health, to be able to prevent the problems that are coming? This is America's health paradigm. First of all, most people don't believe that there are health problems. Most people don't believe that they've got problems. They wake up, they look at the mirror, and they say, I'm fine, I'm fine. And so we've got to do that. We've got to be proactive and not reactive. And so our best health, we hear about basically that we need to be on an anti-inflammatory diet, we need to be engaged with others, purpose, and enjoy life. And there are many health coaches here who are teaching this, and I applaud them. And of course, the Life Extension Foundation, through its magazine, teaches this to everyone. And I think that Bill and the group have been doing a wonderful job. But these are some of the things that prevents our best health: smoking, stress, and unfortunately the human brain is such that we get educated and we know what we're supposed to do, but we still continue doing it. So for example, most people don't know that smoking causes cancer, but they continue to, the numbers of people who smoke. So it takes a particular strength of character to be able to do that, and the only way we can get through to people is by the continuous education process, and to be able to show, to connect the dots for them. We talked about inflammation before. As far back as 2004, Time magazine pointed out that the research was showing that inflammation was the underlying cause for most diseases. I believe that what we have been able to do, and I'll show you in our work, where we've been able to find a way to be able to connect, to be able to repair the immune system. Because the immune system is the fundamental building block to our health. And health is a balance of inflammation in the immune system. Let's look at it. If somebody gets a cut, the skin goes red, and in 7 to 10 days, it heals. But if it doesn't heal, the redness stays, and we call that chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation creates ongoing damage in the body. And so what we've got to do is to find a way to be able to heal that. Our immune system, most of the time when we go to our doctors, we do a blood count, a CBC, and it looks normal, and we think, by the way, our blood count looks fine, so therefore our immune system must be good. Nevertheless, we're still coming down with viruses, and we're coming down with everything else, and our doctors are saying, oh, we look fine. What we're doing, and this is based upon our work, of being able to look at cancer patients and be able to use their stem cells to repair their immune system and measure their immune system many years later and show that they're maintaining that immune surveillance. It led us to be able to say, well, why don't we look at the immune system, the real components of the immune system? We have two components. We have the innate immune system, we have the adaptive immune system. The innate immune system is like our first line responders. We're driving along the highway, an accident occurs, who comes first? Our paramedics. Those are our first line responders. What do? They take the message, they look at the person, analyze, they fix them, but they send a message to the hospital saying to the doctors and nurses, we're sending the patient in. Now you've got our adaptive immune system are like our doctors and nurses, and we refer to them more specifically as our B cells and T cells. You'll hear us talk about T cells, but the T cells, when they age, they undergo a process called aging or immune senescence. The key factor is that as we age, those numbers go down. And when we can measure those and we could see where in the scale of damage or dysfunction they are, we can predict that certain types of diseases. So our immune system, coming back to it, is like a pivot, and it balances inflammation and anti-inflammation. And when we're young, that's balance. As we get older and the immune system weakens, the pro-inflammation or the factors causing inflammation or the proteins in the blood increases, but the ability to have counteracting anti-inflammatory factors decreases. And we measure that. We measure it and we look and we see patients with cancer, a lot of inflammation. Patients with Parkinson's disease, a lot of inflammation. Some healthy, supposedly healthy individuals, a lot of inflammation. And for them, the problems are coming. So this slide basically shows that if you look at aging results in an increase of inflammation. But those individuals who are aging faster and who've got quite severe inflammation, they are going to get all of these one of these different diseases. Patients who have diabetes can get all of these. But there are many people who have systemic inflammation that's manifested many times by a loss of memory. And so when people begin to start losing it, you remember those senior moments that we all talk about? Those senior moments is the beginning of the neuroinflammation that's occurring in the brain. And when you look at patients who have Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's or these neuroinflammatory disorders, that process didn't start on the day the symptoms appeared. That process started 20 years earlier, sometimes 30 years earlier, and it coincided with the beginning of the immune system actually beginning to decrease. So we can measure it, and the objective is to be able to repair that. Now, many people might say, well, we're talking about inflammation, and you saw some of the work done in 2000. I apologize, but I decided to put this publication up because it appeared in 2015. And the important message about this publication is that what it's saying is that those individuals who live to be 100 and over and who achieve healthy aging, when factors were looked at to determine what predicts for these individuals to have healthy aging, it's the extent of the inflammation in their blood. That's basically so if we can keep inflammation low, and we can keep it balanced like I showed you in the picture of the young person. And is it possible to achieve that? The answer is yes, it is. And I will share with you some of the patients who we've been able to achieve that. So imagine, looking at this picture, imagine a house. The inside of your body is like your house. When your house is built and it's new, everything looks pristine. You have a fire in the living room, but the fire has a control on it. So if it begins to flare, the control will prevent it from going up. In a situation that occurs, that when inflammation is going, when the immune system begins to decrease, because the control mechanism begins to decrease, the fire begins to flare. And as it remains uncontrolled, it begins to burn down, and then it eventually gets to there. Most people, when they have chronic diseases and they've got severe diseases, they're in this state. And so you have many people who have joint problems where their joints are destroyed, and then they're saying, well, can we go to an orthopedic surgeon and can we inject stem cells into it to be able to repair that? And the answer is it just depends on how badly damaged it is, because what they're doing is taking some of the already inflamed fluid, like we talked about PRP. So to take PRP from somebody who's already inflamed and stick it in the kitchen like this and expect it to go from there to there is unrealistic. What we need to do is we need to catch it early. However, I'm going to show you in the next video some of the facts, some of the things that what we have been able to do by utilizing our reserve of stem cells in some of our patients. We call that mobilization. So it is possible to actually get people earlier when they're in this state. Yes, some patients in this state, but if they're here or here, it's much easier to get them back here using regenerative medicine.
A South Florida woman says her skin has become so hard and tight, she feels as if she's becoming a statue.
Her only hope seems to be an experimental treatment. The 19's Lynn Martinez shows us how it works in our special assignment report, Skin Deep.
Six years ago, Jessica Massengale was a beautiful young woman going on family cruises and having fun with friends. Today, she barely recognizes the person in those pictures.
I don't know if I'm ever going to get back to that normal point of my life.
At just 22, Jessica was diagnosed with scleroderma, a painful autoimmune disorder that is both baffling and incurable.
Sclero means hard, derma means skin.
Each year, the disease destroys more of Jessica's body.
At least 80% of my skin color is gone.
Her face is becoming mask-like. Her skin is thick, hard, and tight,
You can't even pinch an inch.
making movement difficult.
I could describe it as if somebody takes an IV of concrete and lets that concrete just take over your entire body. And it's like you're turning into a statue.
The 26-year-old relies on her mom for help doing simple things like brushing her hair.
It's the worst feeling you could ever feel, not being able to even, okay, I don't want to cry. Barely being able to even pick up your cup of water and having to ask, oh, can you help me with this? Or going to the bathroom in public and not being able to pull up your pants.
Conventional medicine can no longer help, so Jessica is making a desperate attempt to slow down her disease with an experimental treatment that uses stem cells.
My understanding of the immune system and how stem cells work to repair the immune system led me to develop this new protocol. Let's have a look at your arm.
Dr. Dipnarine Maharaj is a pioneer in stem cell research. For the next 6 weeks, he will be injecting a protein into Jessica, which releases disease-fighting stem cells from her bone marrow.
In a disease like an autoimmune disease where there is immune dysfunction, but there's also very severe inflammation, the stem cells that we are releasing from the bone marrow into the patient's bloodstream, it's acting to reduce the inflammation, but also improve the immune system.
The hope is that Jessica's stem cell count will continue to increase after the treatment, and ultimately, the disease will stop progressing, and her body will heal itself. But the Boynton Beach doctor says there are no guarantees.
There's good scientific evidence that it could work, but I couldn't say to you or the patient that, yes, this is definitely going to work.
The biggest thing.
But this Naples woman is giving everyone a reason to be optimistic. In March, she became the first scleroderma patient to receive the experimental treatment.
We have experienced nothing but amazement.
Like Jessica, Gail's skin was tight, but her insides had also hardened.
My esophagus especially was definitely hardening. I was about 3 months away from a permanent feeding tube.
It's been 4 months since the treatment.
I can actually pinch skin. Before I couldn't pinch anything.
She is off 5 major medications, and the problems with her esophagus have disappeared.
And there's small little steps, but small for another person is absolutely humongous for my husband and I.
Jessica is praying for those very same results.
The biggest hope is to gain some of my independence back. I'm young and I want to date and I want to travel and I want to do all these things.
Insurance does not cover experimental treatments, and it can cost more than $60,000. Jessica, though, has a fundraising page to help pay for her treatment. You can log on to our website, WSVN.com, for more information.
And just to add further to, in Gail's case, what happened was that her esophagus was almost closed off. A year later, when she had her repeat esophagoscopy, the gastroenterologist said he was amazed. He'd never seen anything like that happen. In Jessica's case, her lungs were being damaged and her lung function was actually being severely compromised. Again, when it was repeated, we saw significant improvement, and as we've continued to follow her, you see further that improvement is being maintained. We've treated a number of other patients with scleroderma, and all of them have continued to see improvement. And I attribute that basically to the fact that what we've done is basically reduce the inflammation. The inflammation has come down, but it's by resetting the immune system that we've been able to achieve that. So I want to talk to you about health. And the role of the immune system is essential to longevity and cancer resistance. So if we're going to be able to fight cancer, which is one of the most common diseases now, we've got to make sure that we've got certain cells within our bodies, for example, our natural killer cells. And what these cells, what they do is they basically are circulating, providing what we call the immune surveillance. This slide looks a little bit complicated, but in fact, Bill made it a lot easier for me to be able to explain it. So this is the immune system here. These are cells like the macrophages, like natural killer cells. This is the innate immune system. These are the T cells. Those are part of what we talk about T cell immunosenescence. With aging, the T cells begin to decrease. With aging, the function of these cells begin to decrease. So think about this. In a 20-year-old, you have a normal cell with the DNA, and mutations do occur, and mutations accumulate. But as they accumulate, our DNA, there are protective mechanisms, because if a mutation is very, very severe, the cell has a mechanism to prevent that mutation from becoming lethal. And if it's lethal, then the cell, when it's protected, the cell goes into what we call a senescent stage. That is, unlike a cancer cell, which just keeps dividing and dividing, these cells now become senescent. They'll divide up to a certain point, and then they stop dividing. But as they've stopped dividing, because of the mutations that they have, they will begin to continue to produce these inflammatory proteins. And so it's these senescent cells that's in our bodies that's actually producing the inflammation that's actually driving and causing disease processes. If we have a healthy immune system, like that of a young person, and we maintain that through our lives, when these cells become senescent, the natural killer cells or the T cells will take them out. And many people are saying, well, if you take cells like cancer cells or senescent cells and you increase the telomerase activity, and you hear a lot about using drugs that actually increases telomerase activity, in my opinion, we're going after the wrong target there. Because if you increase the telomerase activity of a cell, which is already protecting itself from cancer, you will actually could potentially drive it to become a cancer cell. Cancer cells don't need telomerase because their telomerase activity is very high. I believe what we showed in treating those patients who had no hope and who were told that they had 3 or 4 days to live and they're still alive, is that we were able to get their own stem cells to produce more of these cells and rebooted their immune system. So this picture shows actually green cells. The green cells are natural killer cells. And these black cells here are cancer cells. And what you see here is actually quite interesting. If you look at the photography, you'll see it looks as though the natural killer cell is grabbing the cancer cell. And these are like spears. And you can see it's actually killing the cell. So they're true killers. And what we really want for our immune system is we want to have large numbers of those, and we want to have them functioning well. And we've been able to show in many patients who come to see me that when we measure their natural killer cell function, it's often quite low. The normal is 17 to 39%. Many of these patients, supposedly healthy individuals, their function is around 1 to 3%. But after 6 weeks of using their own stem cells to regenerate their immune system, we can often see it go up to 35% or go back into the normal range. So these are some of the things that we're able to show.
Curing cancer.
And so one of the ways that we're approaching diseases is that as you could see, we're dealing with multiple diseases, but the basis on which we're treating diseases is we're saying that these diseases are all the underlying root cause of the problem is inflammation. So if you go after inflammation and you correct it, like those people who live to be 100, whose inflammation is controlled, we can all achieve it. But we still have to come up with solutions for the people who have problems today. And so one of the solutions that one of the ways that we are treating cancer is in a clinical study where we feel that the individual's own immune system is probably so badly damaged from all the chemotherapy and the radiation and the fact that their immune system may be difficult to turn back on. So what we're doing is asking young people to give us some of their cells of their immune system, and we're putting it back into these patients with cancer. And I wanted to share it with you. This is currently a clinical study that we have ongoing at the Institute.
Curing cancer, it may be medicine's greatest and most vexing challenge. Doctors have found better ways to treat cancer, and overall deaths are on the decline. But no medication, no treatment can yet quickly rid your body of cancerous cells. That is, until now. CBS 12's Juan Carlos Vanhul is here with what promises to be an amazing breakthrough, a possible cure for cancer. Juan Carlos.
Indeed, Kurt, scientists have always known certain people just don't get cancer, even when exposed to cancer-inducing agents such as cigarettes. Now, what makes those people immune to the disease is being developed to kill cancer, a possible cure in humans that may be found right here in Palm Beach County. You are looking at microscopic video of cancer cells being eradicated. They're literally being popped at the top and at the bottom by special healthy cells. Proof researchers say that a cure is out there. A cure is what millions like Eileen Fleming have been looking for. The 49-year-old in a fight for life with Hodgkin's lymphoma, a form of cancer which formed a malignant tumor in her right lung.
It weakens you, you get sick, you get tired.
But as it turns out, Eileen and other cancer patients may one day not have to undergo chemo. Just a transfer of cells. As the elusive cure for cancer, a godsend for millions around the world, could be coming. Not from the heavens, but from this Boynton Beach-based medical building.
Big news. I'm really excited for, this program.
So do you want me to sign off on it?
Yes.
Dr. Dipnarine Maharaj, a hematologist and stem cell transplant specialist, will soon hold a clinical trial at the South Florida Bone Marrow Stem Cell Transplant Institute that could prove the cure for cancer has already been found. It all started with his partner, Wake Forest University professor Zane Cooey, who's done cancer research on lab mice for years. He found mice who never got cancer, even after being exposed to it, and then determined that certain white blood cells within their immune system prevented them from getting the cancer.
What he was also able to find was that he could transfer those cells from the mice that would not get cancer to mice that actually had cancers induced and also developed cancer, and he was able to cure the mice of those cancers.
Back to that video here showing a cancer cell being attacked by the smaller white blood cells. The cancer cell literally exploding and disappearing. After 10 years of research on mice, the FDA has approved Dr. Maharaj to try out the white blood cell infusion on human cancer patients at his institute.
My gut is that based upon what we have seen in the mouse model, where you have mice that can be cured of the cancer, my gut is that this looks very promising. We may have a potential cure for cancer.
Well, Dr. Maharaj has gotten federal approval to run this clinical trial. He still has to get through the financial hurdle. It takes $4 million to run a clinical trial on 29 patients.
So the approach we're taking is basically taking all the cells of the immune system from a young, healthy donor whose immune system is very powerful and putting it back in to kill the cancer. And so that is an approach which basically does not depend on a drug. This is an article which appeared in Time magazine on April 4, 2016. And it talks about immunotherapy as being the future of cancer treatment. The technology, many of the technologies basically are looking at identifying a drug which could be used to be able to unblock the immune system, which is being blocked by the cancer. And so, however, many of these treatments are going to be extremely expensive. We believe that the treatment that we're doing, which is basically asking young donors, which is like a blood transfusion, to be able to give back to a patient to repair their immune system, the cost will be considerably less. It is predicted that the improvement that we might see with the immunotherapy of using these types of selective drugs might be an improvement of 10 to 20%. But I think that it's really possible to cure cancer. And to cure cancer, the best way to cure cancer is prevent it. Just like vaccinations prevented diseases, to prevent it. And so in our program, the approach is, let me measure your immune system. And let me look and see where it is. If you haven't got cancer, and if there's a risk of cancer in your family or you're worried about it, let me measure it. Because we can improve it. And once we improve it, we can maintain it. And I think that that's the approach that we would like to take. Yes, we have to come up with solutions for cancer when patients develop it, but we also want to prevent it. And if we go after it in a two-pronged approach, then we're going to achieve the success that the President talked about with the Moonshot program. But waiting till the cancer develops, it's like going after it after closing the door after the horses have bolted. So, aging of the immune system is responsible for diseases, infections, cancers, autoimmune diseases, chronic inflammatory diseases, frailty. Frailty is really a marker of aging. And we've talked about cancers, autoimmune diseases. You saw some of these patients. I want to also highlight some patients with chronic inflammatory diseases. And I want to show you how, when we've measured their immune system and the markers of the aging or the T-cell immunosenescence, how we can actually, in the blood test before and after, we can show correction. And so one of the things that we're doing is measuring what we call this immune risk profile. We take a blood sample, we analyze the immune system, the functional immune system, and we can tell the individual whether they've got both systems broken down, or one is broken down, the other is, or where the holes are. And the objective is to correct that.
Question: why is it some people can stay out in the sun all day and never get skin cancer, but others do? The answer lies within the human body.
If you're getting cancers all the time, there's something wrong with your immune system.
Laura Skelchak has been on both sides of the biological battle as a doctor and a patient.
All organic.
Nice.
2 huge bags.
Her healthy diet just one part of her strategy to keep cancer at bay. She's using her immune system as the ultimate weapon.
The basis for health is to be balanced, make sure you have enough nutrients, no toxins, and make sure your immune system is working. If your immune system is working, you won't get the skin cancers to begin with, because your immune system will get rid of any abnormal cells before they turn into a cancer.
At the South Florida Bone Marrow Transplant Institute, Dr. Dipnarine Maharaj does something called an immune risk profile. From a blood sample, they're able to count your natural-born cancer-killing cells. The lab even generates a numeric score, which tells you just how effective your body is at killing cancer. In this video from Cambridge Institute for Medical Research, you actually see those cells in action. Highlighted here in green, they latch onto the cancer cells, attacking them from all sides, and eventually killing them.
What we're looking to do is, with using this blood test, is to be able to give people an indication of potentially where the problems are beginning to occur early, and then find solutions for those.
Dr. Maharaj's entire practice is based on the premise that when the immune system is healthy, cells inside our body will track down and kill cancer. And it's only when the immune system breaks down that cancer is allowed to grow unchecked.
How are you feeling?
I feel great.
His newest patient, Dr. Skelchak.
Why are you doing this? Because I know enough about medicine, health, that the best way to take care of myself long term is to make sure my immune system is working.
I believe that the solution to cancer is not necessarily waiting till cancer develops. I think the solution is really identifying predictors that will tell us that cancer is developing and then doing something about it.
The power to kill cancer naturally before it gets to a point where you need chemo or radiation, before it's a life or death emergency. And it turns out timing is everything with
What he was going on to say is one of the root causes, which I'll talk about, of what affects our immune system is sleep. And that is that if we don't sleep, and we can see it very clearly when people are not sleeping, how their immune system is affected. So in our immune risk profile, what we're looking at is a way to look at inflammation, and we're also looking at a way of identifying the markers associated with aging, and also the anti and inflammatory cytokines and the cancer-killing activity. We measure all of that from your blood test, and we can basically now give you a profile of where it is. Now, unless we could do something about it, there's really not much point in measuring that. The data is very clearly there about the predictive value of these different tests. But the fact is that using the technology that we've developed, where we could treat patients who had severe cancers and correct their immune system, we're using the same technology in a non-invasive, safe way to be able to help those individuals who are beginning to see the effects of aging and their immune system. And so this is one of the pathways that we see that's working, and we want to add to that. And how do we add to that? What about those individuals who don't have, or whose immune system isn't able to correct? That's where we come in with the young blood. So it's a series of strategies that we've put together to be able to help the individual, no matter where they are in terms of their lifespan. This immune risk profile is very predictive, and what this slide is showing is that if somebody has an immune risk profile measured on the blood test, their mortality is increased, their morbidity is increased, their quality of life is poor. Whereas if they have a no immune risk profile, decreased mortality, morbidity, and a good quality of life. And what's the evidence for this? Well, populations that have been studied that live to be 100 and healthy, when you look for them, you see that the majority of them have this no immune risk profile. Therefore, if an individual has now an abnormal immune risk profile, and we correct it and we keep it there, the likelihood is that they will live to be healthy and well into their later stages of life. And that's ultimately what we want. So this is a graph that I show, that when we do the immune risk profile, we can place somebody, we can actually tell the person where they are. Unfortunately, a lot of the times when we do it, we find that many of the individuals are here. Chronologically, they appear younger, but biologically, they're very aged and very old. And what we want to do is to do that. We want to push their immune system back. And the answer is that we have and we can do that. Because when we measure the immune risk profile in individuals, we treat them using the stem cell protocols that I've developed, we can do that, and we can measure it, and we could show them that it is being done. So this process that we're doing is actually very simple. When we are born, we have a reserve of stem cells in the bone marrow. This is our reserve tank. When we're born, we have 20,000 of these. We call them pluripotent. That is, they have the ability to mature into any type of cell in the body. Each year, one of those cells within that reserve tank in the bone marrow will actually differentiate to form the cells of the immune system. So theoretically, if we have 20,000 and they're all preserved, we could live to be 20,000 years old, right? But we don't, because what happens is we're exposed to toxins which causes mutations. And many of these cells die, and a lot of them die early. We have a program now where firefighters, because they're exposed to a lot of toxins, their insurance pays for them to collect and store their stem cells because their risk of cancer and other diseases is very high. However, many of them don't sleep. And when they come to have their cells collected, we can see that because of the lack of sleep, their ability to release the stem cells is actually decreased. Our capability and our longevity is determined by our ability to release these stem cells which go throughout the body and repair. And you will hear me talk about it later, and you'll see a picture of me, because I believe that one of the strategies we have of maintaining a young age is actually to correct our immune system and then take some of these cells and freeze it. Because when we freeze those cells, they don't age. We can age. But by measuring our immune system, and at the time when it's necessary to put those cells back in, they will rejuvenate our immune system and take us back to a younger age. So this process, we show, reduces inflammation, regenerates damaged cells, and revives the immune system. And I want to share with you a story now of a patient. And we've talked about cancer. Now I'm going to talk about neuroinflammatory diseases. And one of the most common neuroinflammatory diseases is Parkinson's disease. And this patient who came to see me, and her story was published in a magazine called Legatus, which goes out to thousands of individuals. So she's quite happy with me discussing her story. She was diagnosed it was actually around 2010 that she began to have symptoms, and she was seen at the Cleveland Clinic in Las Vegas. And she was initially diagnosed with a stroke, but she continued to deteriorate. And so 5 years later, in 2013, she went to the University of San Francisco to the Movement Disorders Program, and there she was diagnosed with Parkinson's, a form of Parkinson's called corticobacillar degeneration. She was told that there was nothing that could be done for it, that she had 4 to 5 years to live, and the message was just go home, enjoy yourself, and enjoy what time that you have. They heard about what we were doing at the Institute, and they came, and so basically I explained to them the process and what we were doing. And so they embarked on a program of stem cell mobilization. One of the important things about this form of Parkinson's is that the patients often have severe movement disorders, where many times they're not aware of where their arms are, and they begin to lose their memory. What we believe is happening, and you saw it in one of the slides, that what the young blood is supposed to do is revive cells in the brain called microglial cells. And that's what these cells look like here. These are microglial cells. These are the cells, or we call them macrophages. These are the cells which, when inflammation occurs, they remain inflamed, and they produce proteins called inflammatory proteins. Some of these are TNF-alpha, which destroys the nerve cells. So as long as these cells are activated, they will continue to destroy the brain. And as I mentioned to you before, when we begin to start losing our memory, it's because these cells are beginning to be activated because the immune system is going down. So our objective with the stem cell mobilization process is to decrease the activity or the activation of these microglial cells. And in the process that I used, animal studies have shown that these microglial cells can become, their activity is decreased. And we believe that the reason why we're seeing the improvement in the nerve function of these patients is because we're doing that. And we're improving their immune system. So, after being treated for 6 weeks, what Linda saw was a significant improvement. We measure a scale called the Unified Disease Parkinson Scale. And this gives us an indication of the severity of the patient's Parkinson's. And what we showed was after 6 weeks, the more severe the disease, the higher the score. When someone is normal, the score is 0. And so what happened in her case is her score went from 33 to 12 after 6 weeks. And there was a significant improvement. Her husband, Jerry, said that everything improved. She got movement back in her left arm. That's the left arm, which she wasn't aware where it was before. And of course, the family were very overjoyed because here now they see improvement, whereas before they were told there was nothing that could be done. These are examples of some of the patients who we're treating, and we're seeing this type of improvement. When you look at the objectively, when patients are treated with diseases like Parkinson's disease, many neurologists will say this treatment is working because it's what's called a placebo effect. The placebo effect is where the patient feels they're going to get better, and they appear to get better. So the only way you could know that this treatment is working is by doing scans. And here's an example of the patient's scans. The picture is not so good, but I'll try and explain it. The green areas are the abnormal areas in the patients on the SPECT scan. 6 weeks after the treatment, if you look at the brain, you'll see that the green areas are basically gone. This is what we believe that's happening here, is the microglial activation, which is actually causing a decrease in the blood supply or the blood flow, causing the green areas, has improved. And that's why we're seeing it, and we're seeing it clinically. This is another example. If anyone looks at PBS, they'll see Dr. Amen. He shows these SPECT scans. This is another picture of what the SPECT scan looks like. This is another patient here who we treated. This is the frontal lobe, and looking at the underside of the frontal lobe, you see these huge holes in the brain. 6 weeks after the treatment, they've improved. I want to share with you another story. This is another patient. Now, this is somebody who has diabetes, another common disease. 241 million people around the world, 26 million people in the United States, and the incidence is increasing. So this was a patient who was 77, who was losing his memory, but he had a number of other problems: osteoarthritis, short-term memory loss, and depression. And what we showed was that by treating him over 6 weeks, these are markers of inflammation. They're the ones that we talked about, the pro-inflammatory markers that actually causes damage to the cells. This was before, this is after, before, after. So we are showing the reduction in the inflammation. And also I showed you about the natural killer cells. His natural killer cell function was reduced. It improves, it goes back to normal. These are cells that we talked about that I showed you on the graph with aging. They were the green ones. They're the naive cells. A characteristic feature of immune senescence or aging of the immune system. Here you see it was low, it has increased. I am not aware of any publications or anyone who has been able to show that you could take an individual and increase their naive T cells the way we've been able to do this. Similarly, CD4, that's another type of T cell, an increase in the number of naive T cells. The memory cells, which are the senescent cells of the immune system, are decreasing. And what we see clinically, what we see clinically is the patient improved memory, improved immune markers, increased naive cells, decreased memory cells, decreased inflammatory cytokines, C-peptide improvement, improved glucose regulation, decreased hemoglobin A1C, increased natural killer cell activity. What we've done is just basically turn the inflammation down by improving the immune system. And that's the way that we want to treat diabetes. Diabetes is treated now by giving a medication which reduces the blood sugar. But that's not treating the root cause, because if you take patients who are treated with diabetes and you keep the blood sugars tightly controlled and you follow them 5 years later, you have not decreased. There is not a significant decrease in the complications associated with diabetes just by keeping the blood sugar controlled. So once we've corrected the immune system, so what we do with our patients is we measure the immune system, we correct the immune dysfunction, we then go on to analyze the root causes, correct these, and then once the immune system is corrected, then we say to the person, we've gotten you back there. Now you're very fortunate, let's take some of your cells and freeze it. And so we do what's called a root cause analysis. These are all the different sources of inflammation that can occur. Environmental toxins, food, the food that we eat, the gut microbiome, toxins like smoking, stress, lack of sleep, exposure to too much sunlight, alcohol. These are the root causes that we basically go back to and analyze and look for, and we want the patient to correct it because we want to maintain that immune system. There are different diets that have been proposed over the years, but fat is an inflammatory organ. It's actually an immune organ. And in fact, what happens is that the reason why most diets don't work is because it's not doing really anything to the inflammation. The inflammation is actually what's driving the person to eat more. And unless we correct the inflammation and we get the person back to this stage, the diseases that comes with obesity and pre-obesity like diabetes and pre-diabetes will remain uncorrected. What we are doing is basically converting by turning the inflammation down, we're actually turning the individual back to something like this, which is an anti-inflammatory state. Food is important because, many times we're eating food which is causing a leaky gut, and unless we can correct that, the types of food that we're eating is actually causing inflammation. We measure it. This is someone who's very severely gluten sensitive. Unless we correct this, the improvements we've done in the immune system will continue to be there. Not everyone is gluten sensitive. So you see fads or crazes of everybody going and eating gluten-free food. You don't need to do that. You need to measure it and see whether in fact you are gluten sensitive or not. Here's someone who's, we also look at the person's blood to look at the micronutrients in their blood. Most of the diets that we eat, they're micronutrient poor and calorie rich. And this is the reason why we have an epidemic of obesity, because the cells are starving of the right nutrients. So when the cells are starving of the nutrients, we feel hungry and we keep eating. And what we do is we actually will measure in the blood our micronutrients to make sure. Here's somebody who's got a lot of abnormalities. And so we would like to get this person back to here. This person would benefit from the different supplements that would actually get them to here. We look at the gut microbiome. Everyone has their own personalized signature of the gut microbiome. We want to make sure that that's corrected. And we can measure the inflammation. And so in the last part, we say, let's collect and store your stem cells.
WPBF 25 News investigates the medical breakthrough killing cancer. We found out the secret weapon is living inside of you right now. Investigative reporter Paula Groen takes you inside the local lab where one doctor is wiping out the disease before it even starts.
Here's this one too. We'll do that one.
Sam Eaton has a good life. A beautiful wife by his side.
Let's go see how the sunset's going to look tonight.
A beautiful house to call home.
This is actually a training burn when I first got hired in 1991.
And a noble profession people admire.
This helmet was presented to me last year.
But it's that same job, fighting fires, breathing in all that smoke, that puts them at an increased risk of getting cancer.
It makes you check yourself in the career, because you know that not only are these seen dangers there, but there's this unseen danger that you can't know when you're getting exposed and what your levels are.
So Sam is taking the fight to cancer before it even starts.
So how are you doing?
Doing great, feeling good.
He's collecting his stem cells and storing them at the South Florida Bone Marrow Stem Cell Transplant Institute in Boynton Beach. Think of it like your own personal biological vault. But instead of money, you lock away the one currency that can keep you alive: stem cells.
The stem cells, which are the basis of our immune system, we can collect it and keep it. So when we freeze those stem cells, that individual's immune system is essentially frozen in time.
Dr. Dipnarine Maharaj is a pioneer in the stem cell transplant movement. Inside his lab, trillions of stem cells are collected, frozen, and stored, good for up to 40 years or until a patient needs them to fight disease.
That immunity boosting is the biggest fight, the best fight you can have.
If somebody has a hole here or they have a hole here, we can pick it up
The doctor operates under the assumption that all of us have cancer in our bodies right now. The only difference between a healthy person and a cancer patient is a healthy immune system.
Is there any concern that this would not work?
The concern would be that if at the time when we collected the individual's own immune system there was a problem already existing, then it would not work as well. But what we already know is that even when patients develop cancer, we can still use their stem cells when they've already developed cancer, and we can get long-term disease-free survival. And the advantage of doing it now is that he's healthy.
My goal with this on a personal level is to put myself in a situation where in case I do develop cancer later on in life, that I'll have an opportunity to recapture my immunity.
Does this give you peace of mind?
There's no even guarantee that this is going to work. You know, that it certainly is a step in the right direction. You got to consider this. This is an important insurance that you need to consider for yourself.
Dr. Maharaj believes this could be the key to breaking new records in how long people live. The one catch: freezing and storing your stem cells costs around $15,000, and most insurance plans don't cover it. But there are financing options available, so for a couple of $100s a month, you can pay for it. Paul Legrone, WPBF 25.
People who should be thinking about collecting and storing their stem cells include firefighters or people exposed to toxins. But there's another big group of people who should be thinking about that, and that's women. Because as Bill showed, the risk of breast cancer is significantly high, and it's increasing. So even if, and then of course there are women who now, after Angelina Jolie found that she was BRCA1, BRCA2 positive, what they've been doing is increased testing, but they're going to have fairly radical surgery with mastectomy and oophorectomies. There are many people who probably would be put off that, and so if we have women who are concerned and they do test positive for BRCA1, BRCA2, and if they do have a family history of breast cancer, what we're saying they can do is actually measure their immune system. If it's abnormal, let's correct it. And then let's take some of their stem cells and store it. I put this picture here of Robin Roberts, because it's a common fact, or it's a fact, that when women are diagnosed with breast cancer and they're offered the standard of care, which is radiation and chemotherapy, they're never told that the risk of leukemia can be between 8 and 17 times greater. And actually, Robin Roberts, that's what happened to her. She developed leukemia 4 years after she was treated for breast cancer with chemotherapy and radiation. She developed this form of leukemia called myelodysplasia. And as I said before, the risk of getting leukemia in women with breast cancer who've received chemotherapy and radiation is 8 to 17 times greater. So what was the treatment for her when she developed leukemia? She needed to have a bone marrow stem cell transplant. She was fortunate that her sister was a match. So she had an allogeneic transplant. The other type of transplant she could have had to reinstate her immune system was if she had stored her own stem cells, then she wouldn't have needed a donor. And if you say, well, what about if she has the donor? If the donor cells, the chances of survival would be greater. The answer is the 5-year disease-free survival, whether she had the donor from her sister or her own cells, which would have been stored, is exactly the same. So the outcomes are exactly the same at 5 years. But the mortality associated with the allogeneic type of transplant is high. It's 26 to 41%. So there was a 26 to 41% that with her going in and having that procedure, she would not have survived. Whereas if she had her own stem cells stored, it's 0 to 5%. Here is another problem we face. Most people have heard of the National Marrow Donor Program. The incidence of leukemia and myelodysplasia is increasing. So most people, if they get leukemia or they do get myelodysplasia, they will depend on the National Marrow Donor Program to find a donor for them. But this paper, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, showed that in fact that's insurance that most people think that they have, because the National Marrow Donor Program is doing the work for them, really doesn't exist, or it is not really as good as they think. Because if you look at ethnicity, you will see that in Robin Roberts' case, if she needed a donor, the chances of her getting a donor would have only been 23%. And even in white, where most of the people who are in the National Donor Program, it's only 51%. So there are huge disparities, and that's one of the reasons, again, why I think it's really important that everybody take responsibility for their health care. Do something now. Even if you can't store your stem cells, get your immune system measured. Look at your root causes, and let's get you on a path of health. And at the right time, we take your cells and we freeze it. It's a very simple procedure. It's a straightforward procedure. It's just like going to the blood bank and actually donating platelets. It takes 4 to 6 hours, not 46, it's 4 to 6. And guess what? I had the opportunity to do it because I can do it for myself because we have the program. So I was the first one in there. There are some very esteemed people in this audience who've already done it for themselves. And I think it's really, this is the way to really solve the problem of aging. Why? Because it is the fountain of youth. And that's what we're all looking for. And why do we say that? Because this lady who lived to be 115, she was healthy and she lived to be 115. And when she died, she donated her body to science. And the scientists who actually did the work, they were interviewed by the new scientists, and the reporters asked the scientists who had done the work, you've done all of this work, what do you think that the common person who doesn't understand all the science, what's the message that you think that they could get? And what she said is that her results raised the possibility of rejuvenating aging bodies by injecting people with stem cells saved from early in their lives. I rest my case. So everyone should measure their immune system and get into a program of health and wellness. Let's start now to achieve those objectives. And who should do it? And using corrective action now by measuring immune dysfunction. And we firmly believe that the time is now to actually do this because it's going to save us money. For those of people who haven't put aside the $250,000 that we are going to need after age 65, think about it this way. It costs $15,000 to collect and store the stem cells now. Let's say that we have to keep it for 35 years, 15 plus 35, it's still a lot less than $250,000. So that's the economics. So finally, you've been a very, very attentive audience, and I thank you for being here. I think we certainly have good pathways to be able to be very optimistic about really going after the effects of aging. And it's not in animals we're doing it. These are effects we're seeing in individuals who are coming and partaking of our program now. And so we want to spread the word and let as many people know about it, that they can have hope, that we can solve major problems, but we can do it a lot better if we catch it early and we get onto a pathway of health. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yes.
We have time to take a couple of questions. If you'd like to ask questions, I'm going to bring the microphone to you, and we'll start in the front.
4 years ago, I had a carotid artery that was very high on my right side. It was 80% blocked. I had an operation, and I had a stroke during the operation. The next day, I had pain in my shoulder. I had a lot of therapy, and I went to a specialist for my shoulder. He told me that I had I had a stroke, that I had a frozen shoulder. Then last fall, I did a platelet-rich plasma on my left side, but I didn't use the bone marrow. They just did it. And then 3 months ago, I went to a city on the west, Fort Myers, and I had it again, including plurotherapy. It still hurts, but I also didn't do the bone marrow. So I don't know if you can help me. I wish you can. I'm sure you can.
The answer is yes. I believe we can help you because think about it this way. If you just use the platelets are sitting in an environment of basically inflammation because when a stroke occurs, that's systemic inflammation is there. And so if you're taking those cells and you're putting it just into another area, you may see some benefit from the trauma of just putting the needle of going in can actually cause some improvement. But if it's what you need is basically the product that's going to be put in has to be stimulated in such a way that the anti-inflammatory proteins are increased with higher numbers, because that's also going to go and help the cells themselves to be able to regenerate. Steroids work because they're anti-inflammatories, right? So when people get injections, they have inflammation, they get injected with steroids. But the steroids actually are harmful because it's a temporary relief, but actually later on, it can cause damage to the tissues, and it also depresses the immune system. The advantage of using stem cell technology like this is if you get the right product, which is an anti-inflammatory product, which comes back to using the young blood, is that you're putting in very powerful anti-inflammatory products. I say products because we have paracrines, cytokines, exosomes. Exosomes are little parts of the cells that are transmitting DNA and RNA. These are all going to repair the damaged cells. So this is something that we can talk to you more about of what could be done to optimize. Yes, okay. Right, okay.
We have another question. Before I get to it, though, I want to let you know that we did videotape this presentation this evening, and it will be available tomorrow morning on our YouTube channel through our website. So if you'd like to review it again or tell your friends about it, they can go to our YouTube channel to see it. But I had a question here, Leonardo.
Doctor, I'm sorry, I cannot even pronounce your name, but I congratulate you because you are producing a breakthrough in medicine. To me, you might not be a genius, but you are in that way to become one of them. Is this friend of mine, because he's a friend of mine. I don't know him, but he's a friend of mine. He would know something about inflammation. He wouldn't have had the carotid problem that he had. I congratulate you, and I cannot talk too much because you are going to be here until midnight. But those people who can be in touch with Life Extension Foundation magazine, as he mentioned, try to read it, try to get associated with them, and you will learn really, really good medicine, but not the type of medicine that we practice, but the prophylactic preventive medicine. That's the kind of medicine that really counts. That's the type of medicine that this doctor is practicing. For you, it's not an advice, but try not to rise the level of that. Diabetes can be prevented or cured when you are going to be confronted with these two kinds of people, FDA and the pharmaceutical companies. They like the people who have diabetes to live 1,000 years, but keep on taking the medication they produce. If you cure them, those pharmaceutical companies, they won't like what you are doing. I congratulate you.
Thank you.
Yes, I had a couple questions. Number one, when is the trial that you talked about with partnering with Life Extension to begin? How long does it last, and do you have all the volunteers for that particular study?
So we've been moving along as quickly as we can to get the process to be able to submit it for the IND. Once that is done, the time period by which it would be approved, we don't know that as yet. So we're estimating, looking at projection of time, that probably sometime in the summer would be the time when we could hopefully be able to start it. As far as volunteers for it, based upon an article and Bill has talked about this from the Life Extension magazine, there were huge numbers of people who expressed an interest. Right now we can't say that they're eligible or not because there are eligibility criteria for the protocol, but there's been a very, very strong interest. The real need is actually to get funding for it because it's a clinical trial. And so with a clinical trial, we have to have funding for it. So that's going to be the next step. All the pieces are going into place to be able to get the study ready to start. But the funding also needs to be in place to be able to get it going. It will go on over 2 years. And we're looking for a group of between 40 to 50 people who will receive the treatment. And they'll be followed for a year after.
There's a question here. John?
Yes, good evening. I wanted to inquire about the GDF-11. It was mentioned in the earlier seminar that Bill said. How someone said that they were getting it. How can a layman obtain that, and is it legal?
That would be a Bill answer, I think.
Hi, thanks. Thank you very much for an excellent talk, and I just have one question. Could you comment briefly on induced pluripotent stem cells?
Yes, yeah. So I think that first of all, they're embryonic stem cells, and secondly, they're obtained by taking a cell from the individual, which is a skin cell. Usually, in most cases, it's a skin cell, and actually turning on 4 genes. Or these are called Yamanaka factors, which actually converts the cell back to an embryonic cell, but it's the individual's own. All the work that has been done so far has been done in animals. The issue that I see personally about it is the fact that if you take a skin cell, and let's say you take a 60-year-old individual skin cell, those cells have accumulated mutations over the years. And therefore, what you're doing is putting that back into, you're turning it back into an embryonic stem cell. And unless you've done something to actually suppress the mutations that have occurred there, you run the risk that those mutations could actually turn the cell back on to produce some type of disease process. So I know that there are studies going on right now at Harvard where the idea is to start clinical studies, certainly in Japan and in Harvard. But I think that because they're embryonic stem cells, and because the genes have been turned back on, the question is whether genes that would cause cancer have also been turned on as well. And unless we know that, we're not certain how effective it would be. And that's the reason why, although it was discovered in 2006, the number of clinical studies that have been done using it are still few. We've been using the individual's own stem cells for over 30 years. And the fundamental principle by which it works is basically reinstating immune surveillance. And that's what I think we need to do. We need to focus on. Because the repair to the tissues do occur if we have a sufficient number of stem cells. But what's happening in diabetes, for example, is that with the severe inflammation, the ability of the reserve stem cells to regenerate the tissues, like, for example, patients who have neurological illnesses, it's being blocked because the inflammatory factors are blocking the release of the reserve of stem cells we have in the bone marrow. If we can unblock that, then the cells go on and they do what they're supposed to do and help to regenerate the tissues. And that's what we're showing in our patients. In our patients, what we're showing is that by improving the immune system, reducing the inflammation, we allow the stem cells to continue to do what they should normally do. So, thank you.
There's a question back here.
I'm a retired reporter from the London Sunday Times.
And I did many stories at Institute of Health on exactly what you're. It's when it began 20 years ago. Everything you say is accurate and wonderful. I'm glad to hear it happening. You know, I did a story on a mouse, an old mouse that was given blood from a young mouse and became young again and big. I did a story on a woman who was cured of melanoma using blood, first person. And everything you say is absolutely amazing. I'm an author now, and I have a book coming out on public broadcasting. It's going to be on 680 stations. And I think that I'll talk to my people there and try to get them to help you raise funds too.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much.
There's a question back here.
Thank you. Doctor,
yeah.
Thank you for your speech. It was very informative. Now, I just want to make sure that I understand. Your anti-aging protocol, using the young blood, you're referring to not using the red blood cells, but only the plasma of the young individual?
That is correct, yes.
That is correct?
Yes.
Now, if it's to be used as an anti-aging protocol, I would imagine that, let's say it does become applicable and an actual protocol that people can use, there are going to be individuals that are older and healthy, yet they want to extend their life. So they'll be doing it as a prophylactic. Now, to use somebody else's tissues, for some folks, they may not be too happy with that choice. So my question is this. Back in 1920, there was a Nobel Prize winner. His name was Alex Carroll, I think is what his name was. And he described a protocol where he used not organic or organ-related plasma, but he used a plasma substitute on his old dog that was about to die. And it extended the dog's life. Now, my question is this. What do you think, not using actually young blood, but using a plasma substitute, and by just the effect of removing somebody's blood their plasma that is old and replacing it with a substitute, not an actual organic tissue, but a substitute, would that not be as effective as using a person's own or a young blood into an old blood or into an old individual? Would that not be as effective and not risk disease transmission? Is that not something to contemplate in your studies?
It's a very good idea. Perhaps you should come and work with us.
I send you a text. I send you an email. I send you actually a fax giving my assets that I have on any of your studies that you may want to do in the future.
Well, we'll talk about that after. So, as always, when it sounds simple, there can be obstacles. So here's one solution. Those people who don't want somebody else's blood when they're young and when their immune system is corrected and their inflammatory markers are low, I'm recommending that they take some of their own blood and they store it, including their plasma. And in our program, that's what we're doing. So everyone who collects their stem cells, they're also collecting the plasma as well. So it's their own that they could use in the future. Now, the problem with just using a substitute goes back to how do we believe that this is working? We believe that someone asked the question about GDF11. GDF11 is one component of all the various factors which are in the blood. We don't really know which one it is, but the question is, if a treatment works, we could analyze that later, but we have an acute problem to solve. And so therefore using all the factors, but recognizing the fact that using it from a young person and the cells that actually will secrete certain factors that are important, and it's all those different components that are important. If you use a substitute, then you have to know which particular protein is in the substitute that is going to work. And therefore, we run the risk that we could be thinking, and there have been some issues with the use of GDF-11, where in the animal work, what was demonstrated in one lab was not actually been able to be reproduced in another lab. And that could be some of the issues with trying to identify just one protein. So we have to think globally. We have to think that there's redundancies of different types of proteins in the blood and coming up with the safest way. We are not taking cells. We're just taking the components of the cells that are being secreted. And that's why we believe that this is it's again safer to use that. But there's also still, as you say, the potential risk of diseases. But we screen. We have to screen the donors using the regulatory requirements of what we have to screen for. So that's going to be taking place. So very good point. Thank you.
Dr. Maharaj, we have time for a couple more questions. But after that, I'd like to encourage people that have questions. Perhaps they can email you or contact you by phone at the Institute.
Certainly.
But we'll have time for a couple more questions. Here's.
Doctor, you mentioned something about Parkinson's disease. What about Huntington's disease? It's a genetic disease. Is there anything you could do for that?
So, so the answer is yes, because we have treated patients with Huntington's disease, and we've been able to show that they have received improvement. I think that the earlier these patients are identified, and they continue on a program which is basically to help to reduce the inflammation but keep their immune system strong, then that's the theory that how we would be able to help them. So Huntington's disease, just like other diseases, they're neuroinflammatory disorders, but in Huntington's disease, the cells that are actually causing the disease process, it's accelerated because of the inherited gene abnormalities. So.
Question over here to Dr. Maharaj.
Yes, Doc. A lot of it has to do with the immune system being strong. How about if you're immunosuppressed from transplantation?
Very good question. I think that we do that when we do allogeneic transplants, where we give someone, we put in a graft from somebody else, and then we have to suppress the immune system so that the graft isn't rejected or doesn't cause a disease. There's a big problem there, because these patients long term, their risk of cancer is increased, their risk of other diseases caused by the immune suppression is actually significantly increased. Well, I think in those situations, the best thing to do would be to, again, work with your doctor to try and get off the immunosuppressants as soon as you could. When I do, with transplants, where we would do allogeneic transplants, and I have patients I'm followed, my role is always try and get them off the immune suppressants, because there's a time when you can do that. So it doesn't mean that because you've had a transplant and you're on immunosuppression that you've got to stay on it for the rest of your life. So you want to be able to work with your doctor to try and reduce those and come off of them as time goes on. Yes. Yes, I've done transplants on patients who were initially put on immunosuppressives, and then later on, as time goes on, we get them off of it. So it is very possible to do so.
Thank you. Hi, doctor. I have a colleague who just recently was diagnosed with renal failure. He's probably going to be watching this tomorrow on the webcam. Can you, if he were to come into your office, what advice, peripheral advice, food, the whole, what would you tell him?
Well, I think, again, it depends. You remember that slide I showed you of the damage with the inflammation, the fire? You remember that slide I showed you of the house, where you have in the kitchen, the fire is flaring, in the living room it's burning down, and in the kitchen it's actually burnt down. A lot depends really on what the stage of his disease is. If he has, if there's still inflammation and there's still functioning kidney, the cells are still functioning, then it might be possible to get improvement in function. There are some patients who've come to see us with renal failure. And there was one patient with renal failure who came, and after we treated him, a year later, he saw improvement. and he started passing urine again, whereas he had not passed any before. So we can see cases like that, but it's very difficult to say to your friend that if he has this, especially depending on the severity of it, that he's actually going to be like that other patient. So really, it's a matter of evaluating him and seeing whether he could be potentially eligible for it.
Dr. Maharaj, we have one last question here, and then I'm going to let everyone know that you can ask Dr. Maharaj downstairs afterwards. You'll be able to have a chance to speak with him briefly. Here you go, one last one.
What kind of support have you had from the American Medical Association or maybe other government agencies? It seems like everyone should be jumping on board with something like this.
Well, I think that what we're actually doing is actually sort of doing pilot work. And I think the next stage of that, for example, like in our cancer clinical study, once we've seen pilot work, we actually take it to the point of getting an approval for the actual treatment. That's called an IND. So certainly we have to follow the required pathway because we want these treatments to become a standard of care. I think the biggest issue that we've had is really because they're innovative, and someone in the audience pointed out, these are actually regenerative medicine, and we're utilizing the individual's own cells and own capability of regenerating tissues. There isn't a pharmaceutical drug. So I think that drug companies, although the likelihood of us getting funded by them to do these is less because we're using a global approach. I think when you also design studies, let's say you take statins, you have to study 1,000 patients because you're looking at one marker, which is cholesterol. But when you're taking somebody's inflammation, and as I showed you, the root causes, and there are multiple causes, it's difficult to be able to design a study of 1,000 people when you have multiple factors going on. You need much larger study numbers. So we come back to this concept now in precision medicine of using what's called N equals 1. And N equals 1 means that the patient is their own control. And when you measure that patient and that patient improves, then you validated it for that particular patient. And so we have to start thinking like that. Because if we start saying that you require a study on 1,000 people to show a 5% improvement to make this a standard of care, when in fact most of what I'm recommending is that these are actions that individuals could take for themselves, then it really comes back to a movement of where people take responsibility for their own healthcare and they drive that, and they're less dependent on the drug companies and they're less dependent on governments because they will be actually taking responsibility, they will save their own health, and it will cost less, and ultimately if it costs less for them, it costs society less, and there's less responsibility for the government to be responsible for everything.
Okay. Maharaj, thank you.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you, Dr. Maharaj.
Thank you very much.
And I just want to give a disclaimer that the Church of Perpetual Life does not endorse any business or any political position, just to go on the record. Also, our next presentations will be the fourth Saturday of the month. So we have Brian Clement from the Hippocrates Institute coming May 28th, and then Michael Lustgarten from who did the TED Talks. He'll be coming on June 25th. But this evening, we have a quick special treat for you. And Charles Rocha will be doing a song, one of our theme songs, Forever Young. And by the way, we do have a reception downstairs where you'll be able to have a chance to meet with and talk with Dr. Maharaj and Mr. Bill Falloon. So we have dinner and drinks downstairs. We look forward to having conversations with you. So let's give a hand. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's give a hand for Charles Rocha, Forever Young.
joyful, may your song always be sung. May you find a strong foundation when the wind of change shifts. May your heart always be busy and stand forever young. May you stay forever young. Grow up to be righteous, may you grow up to be true. May you always find the truth and see the light surrounding you. May your heart always be joyful, stand upright and be strong. May you stay forever young. May you stay forever young. May your hands always be busy, may your feet always be swift. May you find a strong foundation when the winds of change shift. May your heart always be joyful, may your song always be sung. May you stay forever young. May you stay forever young. Forever young. May you stay forever young. May you stay forever young. Thank you. Thanks to the church, too, for support.
Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Rocha, thank you for that rendition, Bob Dylan's version of Forever Young. All right. So we'll meet you downstairs. We have full dinner and drinks for you, and some good, healthy food downstairs.